Morning, guys. How we doing? Welcome to part 2 on 1959. Today we're going to look at Riverside, SAVOY, VERVE, and a few other labels that are on the scene at this point. There's starting to be some real transition label-wise. SAVOY's in decline. Bethlehem's really not on the scene anymore. Speaking of Bethlehem, great Dexter Gordon record on Bethlehem. Decca makes a pretty landmark recording here. Roulette's about to buy Roost out, put an end to the great Roost label. But let's dig in, shall we? We're going to start with SAVOY. And 1959, they brought Curtis Fuller over from Blue Note. And he does some pretty impressive records here. This Imagination set, and then the Blues at... Let me turn my music down, hold on. So, Fuller's doing some great stuff here with Benny Golson, Tommy Flanagan, Jimmy Garrison, Al Harewood. These are kind of interesting covers. There's two more in this set, a Bill Hardman and a George Wallington record. SAVOY's never had a great art department. Even the layout of the fonts and the layout of how they block things up, they're trying to be hip, but SAVOY never does a good job of that. 12,144, 12,141, and when you look at their discography, there's about 4 Fuller records kind of all blocked together because the output of SAVOY at this point is fairly diminished. They're not doing volumes of stuff, and they're starting to transition more towards soul and gospel of where they're going to go. Wilbur Hardin, 12,134, the great trumpet player who played a lot. Coltrane played with him quite a bit in the late 50s and 57, 58. And that Tanganyika Strat record is a pretty tough one to come by. This has Tommy Flanagan, George Duvivier, and J.T. Hogan on the drums. It's a nice record, The King and I, a modern jazz interpretation of those tunes. Again, so you're doing music by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. It's a fun record, tough to come by. It's a Japanese pressing. And this is the George Wallington record. And this has Donald Byrd, Nabi Tota, Nick Stabulus, and Phil Woods. Great stuff. And turn it down again. Still seemed like it was loud. Again, kind of that interesting cover. Wallington was an Italian-born American who changed his name to a very much more English-sounding name, George Wallington. I swore he was a Brit for the longest time. So I did a little research on the guy and found out who he really was. He plays a lot of stuff at Prestige, New Jazz, SAVOY. He's a pretty interesting cat, Wallington, and fits in with a lot of those other cats from that era. Tough record to come by, again, Japanese. In fact, all 4 of those are Japanese. This is one of the last Roost records, number 2232. And the sequence continues into the 2250s. But most of that stuff is kind of vault stuff that Roulette will put out under the Roost name. But this is the great Johnny Hartman. Beautiful pressing of this. And I Thought About You. This is before his Coltrane stuff by about 3 years. And his early work is beautiful, thoughtful. You can see why Coltrane selected him to make that record. He's one of the great jazz singers of that era. He's got some crooner in him, but he's also a great interpreter of ballads and really finds the center of the piece. He gets to know the lyric before he delivers it so that he feels very strongly connected to the music. This is the great Illinois Jacket. It's actually what we're listening to. Flies Again, which of course is a reference to the tune Flying High that he played for years and was one of the stalwarts of the Lionel Hampton Orchestra. And he would play that song, Bring the House Down. And he's one of the great Texas tenormen, one of the great tenormen of all time. I believe he made number 9 on my top 100 black sax players list. His influence is omnipresent. A lot of guys really embody what Jacket is about. And he doesn't get much credit because his modern discography is kind of buried on labels like Roulette. He's got a lot of early 50s, mid-50s stuff on VERVE, hard to come by. A label can have a lot of impact on where your future career will go and how people will view you, which is kind of sad. In '59, Verve is still very much being run by Norman Granz. They're doing stuff like Dizzy Gillespie. Some of his stuff has his big bands in it. Some of his stuff is more small group. He's an incredibly dexterous, vibrant player, full of life, full of power. Again, his personality, that big smile, always seems to work against jazz players. You know, any guy that seems too over-the-top happy, the modern collector doesn't seem to value that. You can smile like Mobley, but you can't have a big grin like Dizzy. Jimmy Joffrey is doing stuff at Verve. There's a couple titles of his, Ad Lib, and the 7 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think he's using different group members, making the group bigger as he goes along. Joffrey is a West Coast cat working for Verve at this point, and he's an incredibly important guy in terms of composition. He's one of the white guys actually are a big proponent of composition in jazz. Composition is something that comes more from the white lineage of music. The blues comes from the black tradition. Composition comes from the European tradition. So guys like Mulligan and Jimmy Joffrey are really big proponents and driving the new compositional sounds that are happening in jazz in the late 50s and early 60s. Sonny Stitt has left Roost at this point, and he was on Verve already in '58, doing only the blues. Now he's doing stuff like Blows the Blues and The Hard Swing. What a great album cover that is. Punching Box in the Nose. These are both outstanding records. He has about 5 records in 1959 on the Verve label, and they're relatively tough to come by, but they ain't too expensive when you find them. $30, $40 range. You can find them less if they're a little beat up. I just want to show you these real quick. These back to back and side by side. Johnny Hodges and Duke Ellington records. They're of note. Ellington doesn't get to be on Verve much because he's under contract with Columbia and other big labels. But he gets to work as a sideman kind of, even though he gets sort of equal billing. And these are both outstanding records. Hodges back with his protege, Ellington, not his protege, but his master in a way. Ellington was the doctor and he was the Watson. And to hear these two again together, it's kind of a love affair. You can just feel the comfort and familiar ground that these two guys shared. Moving on, Riverside is absolutely equally impressive in '59 as they were in 1958. Chet Baker comes over from the West Coast, number 299, and this record is one of my favorite records by Chet. Just beautiful. I believe Pepper Adams is on some of this. Herbie Mann's on some of this. Bill Evans, Kenny Burrell. It's gorgeous, beautiful lyricism. There's a great sorrow in Chet that, for me, is often fueled by his addiction and broken heart. You know, we all have broken hearts at times. This is outstanding stuff. Everybody should try to get that record. Monk has done Brilliant Corners. He's starting to really change the face of music. The critics are starting to get him. He's starting to be recognized by the fans. This 5x5 record is outstanding. Really everything he does on Riverside, Monk, is worth having. Charlie Rouse is now in the group, and Rouse, of course, from Les Jazz Modes. Rouse with Monk is one of the great pairings in music history. Other guys like Johnny Griffin, a lot of John Gilmore play with Monk, but no one really seems to get Monk quite like Charlie Rouse does. Really outstanding. Kenny Dorham featuring Cannibal Adderley, outstanding record. Blue Spring, it's got Dave Amram on the French horn. Cedar Walton shows up here as a pretty young guy. Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, and Philly Joe's on a couple tracks as well. This is outstanding. Modern post-bop. It's not really hard bop. It's just modern, great jazz. Cannonball now is in the stretch of a lot of great records at Riverside. Him and Monk and Bill Evans. Like, it's a pretty amazing roster. Excuse me, dry throat. It's a pretty impressive body of artists that Riverside houses in the late 50s. And they don't quite get the credit that Prestige and Blue Note do. And that's a mistake. If you're a collector and you see an old Riverside, grab it. And they're always a bit of a better value than Blue Note in terms of how much they're going to cost you. And trust me when I say these are all outstanding. All Cannonball records on Riverside. Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Wynton Kelly, Percy Heath. Just great stuff. Bill Evans is, of course, firmly entrenched at Riverside at this point. This is the Portrait and Jazz session. His records are some of the most collectible records in jazz. This is with Paul Motion and Scott LaFaro. LaFaro's going to pass away pretty much soon after this record, and that was a really tough thing for Bill Evans to deal with, but they were very close. And LaFaro is as much of soloist and virtuoso as Evans. These records often feature as much great bass playing as they do piano playing. One of the great trios in jazz history, of course. Buy a reissue of this. Don't waste your time trying to find an original for $1,200. I don't think records should ever go for $1,200 myself. Wes Montgomery is now firmly also in the Riverside fold. And again, look at this body of artists. Chet Baker, Thelonious Monk, Cannonball Adderley, Kenny Dorham. It's just insane. Bill Evans, Wes Montgomery, one of the great guitar players of all time. My buddy Wolfgang Pointer does a great review on Wes Montgomery's career in the Last Jazz Journal. You should check that out if you haven't had the chance. And then this Blue Mitchell record. Blue Mitchell, of course, is playing with Horace Silver a lot over at Blue Note. He gets his own record deal at Riverside while he's still playing with Horace Silver. He brings Benny Golson in on this one, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers. Art Blakey's playing the drums. Sam Jones is on a couple of the tracks on bass as well. Outstanding, blues-driven, soft bop. It's not really hard bop, it's soft mid-bop. You know, it's fantastic. Just has that great groove to it that Horace Silver has kind of imparted on these guys. 1959, Billie Holiday passes away. And this is her last recording. It's on MGM with the Ray Ellis Orchestra. And she's weak and she's frail, but she's still able to deliver a vocal. She's still able to connect with the emotion of a piece, which was always her strongest suit. She was never a diva in terms of her vocal range. She had a 1-octave range. It was her ability to interpret a lyric, make it personal, and connect with it so that you felt her pain through her voice. And even in her dying moments, she's still making some really soft, beautiful, heartfelt. One of the great singers of all time is Billie Holiday. And if there's anything of Earth out there in the cosmos for them to know us by, may it be Billie Holiday. May she represent us all in the cosmos. May she be out there on the Voyager space probes. Let's put this record on there. Let's put some Billie out there. And if I recall, Carl Sagan, who made the famous gold record that goes on the Voyager probes that are now leaving the solar system. Those Voyager 1 and 2s now are intergalactic space beyond the heliosphere, beyond the influence of the sun. The sun now looks like a star to Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. And there's a gold record on those probes from when they were launched. And Carl Sagan does include some jazz and some classical and some other things on that record. I'd be curious to remember what jazz songs he put on there. But this is on Decca. And Decca's about to disappear from the American record market. I can't remember exactly why. I think they're really a United Kingdom label. And I think they end up using a different American distributor. So you don't see a lot of Decca records going into the 60s. But this is the George Russell group with narration by the great John Hendricks. One of the funnest vocalaise scat guys. Hendrix is a blast. I love the stuff with Lambert and Ross, but he does some narrating and some storytelling over top of this, speaking about New York, and this is a record that in true George Russell form explores a lot of the fringes and edges of the music, from modalism to syncopation to the avant-garde. He's a real modern swinging cat, and the band on here will tell you a lot about that. Where'd the band go? I know it's on here. John Coltrane, Bob Brookmeyer, Bill Evans, Art Farmer, Benny Golson, Frank Rehack, Phil Woods, and others. Pretty serious, large group that he's arranging and writing some incredible stuff for. And this is a very modern piece, very brilliant piece. And Decca, they don't really give you much clue that it's black guys doing it, but it's outstanding. And Russell's one of the true giants that doesn't get much credit today, sadly. That wraps up part 2. Part 3 is coming. And of course, we all know some of the great records coming in part 3. Stay tuned. Be safe. Peace.